Ladies and gentlemen, there has been such intense conversation. The intense conversation in the international domain is seeking, under the grand vision and efforts of the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who is a highly credible global leader, at least in his own humble opinion, to put India on trial. They seek to put India on trial after he is gone on the floor of his parliament and specifically said, not vaguely said foreign interference, he specifically said that Indian government officials, credible evidence exists that they have taken an interest in the killing of a Canadian citizen. That's a very direct, so far unsubstantiated, but a direct charge. The credibility of this intelligence is relying upon a 21-member organization collectorate known as the Five Eyes. It has precedents 80 years ago and is basically the Aussies, the New Zealanders, the Canadians, the Brits and the Americans and all their signals, human intelligence as well as defense intelligence agencies working together to share intelligence in a credible fashion. Intelligence, ladies and gentlemen, saves lives. It is the intelligence code breaking of the British at Bletchley Park that not only saved millions of lives of sailors crossing the Atlantic, but perhaps helped end the Second World War a lot faster. In the intelligence community, advance warning, to know in advance what is about to happen. You can have intelligence post facto what took place and who the culprits were, and you can trace it like a criminal investigation. But the goal is to know in advance so you can do preventative action. Okay? Now, here is the credibility of the Canadian intelligence ecosystem. Because when the worst terror attack in the world until 9/11 took place under their Five Eyes, this is what they did. Ladies and gentlemen, let me open chapter 3 of the Kanishka files. On your screens is page 22, volume 2 of the Justice John Major report into the bungling of the worst terror attack in the world investigation by the Canadians. Joining us on the broadcast, General Sudhakar is with us and Wing Commander Praful Bakshi with us as well. Gentlemen, if you'll bear with me, let me read this out. And as we speak, in the spring of 1985, the string of threats against Indian interests was coming to a crescendo. On June 1, 1985, Air India's Chief Vigilance and Security Manager in Bombay sent a telex to Air India offices worldwide indicating that the assessments of threats received by intelligence agencies revealed, and I quote, the likelihood of sabotage attempts being undertaken by Sikh extremists by placing time delay devices, etc., in the aircraft or registered baggage, as well as the fact that extremists are planning to set up suicide squads who may attempt to blow up an aircraft by smuggling in of explosives in the registered or carry-on baggage or any other means. That was 25 days before exactly that happened. Okay? So a telex is sent. Now what happens once the telex is sent? Let's read this. When Air India's assistant airport manager arrived on Air India's scheduled flight at gate 103 in Toronto's Pearson Airport on June 1st, he provided a copy of the June 1st telex to the RCMP, that's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police there. This was also received by Herbert Vaney, the Toronto area sales manager for Air India, who forwarded it to on June 3rd to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Inspector William Dawson, the officer in charge at Toronto's Pearson Airport, and requested suitable action. No one at Air India forwarded the June 1st telex to any Transport Canada officials. They sent it to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. When Dawson received the telex, he sent it to the RSCP MP headquarters but stating in his opinion that there was no need for extra security by this force on the strength of information carried in the message. Believe it or not. It is unclear, or indeed whether this topic was ever discussed with Dale Medson, and Dale Medson was his higher up in command, who was the Transport Canada's safety and security manager at Pearson Airport in 1985. Unclear. They perhaps even didn't discuss it. Believe it or not, the June 1st Telex was also not shared by headquarters with any other airport detachments. It was not sent to the Vancouver airport, the point of origin for CP flight 060, onto which luggage containing the bomb was boarded, that interlined to Air India flight 182. The June 1st Telex was not sent to the National Criminal Intelligence Branch, the RCMP branch in charge of analyzing threat information. The first time Sergeant Warren Sweeney, who was in charge of the terrorist extremist desk at the National Security Enforcement section of NCIB, saw the Telex, was in preparation for this inquiry, and the inquiry happened 30 years later. The man in charge of analyzing security threat information for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police was not even aware that a warning had been sent out 3 weeks before the bombing of exactly the modus of what would be carried out. He was so unaware that an investigation took place, a prosecution took place in which everybody walked scot-free. It is only when an inquiry was conducted in 2010 that, in preparing for the inquiry, he was made aware that such not intelligence, this is a fax, this is in your face, this is you're being told this is about to happen, and it happened 25 days later. Now I want you to picture this. Imagine a fax is sent to the John F. Kennedy Airport United Airlines desk that it is suspected that a group of terrorists are going to hijack planes with knives and then slam them into large buildings in the US. And this fax is not even sent up the chain of command to anybody who's supposed to analyze it, so much so that he is not even aware of it 30 years later. That's the June 1st Telex. In October 1987, John Cook, who was stationed at the Civil Aviation Security Branch at the Transport Canada headquarters, learnt of the existence. 2 years after the bombing, he recognized it was a very important document, but there was no record to indicate when the RCMP had finally provided a copy to any Transport Canada personnel. Cook wrote, and I am quoting, "The information contained in the telex raised many questions and suggested the lack of proper action and sound judgment by Air India and the RCMP," adding, "It's unbelievable that Air India officials did not distribute the document immediately to Transport Canada and other police officials and request a meeting to discuss the necessary measures." Cook's reaction suggests that the content of the June 1st telex may have warranted implementing and coordinating additional procedures beyond those that were already in place on June 23rd, 1985. Let me get General Sudhakar into this conversation. General Sudhakar, now we are having a very vivid global discussion right now, which is benchmark on the genius, accuracy, vibrancy and credibility of Canadian intelligence. As we go page by page in this report, what does it tell about the rather picky, choosy, convenient, selective memory of Canadian intelligence?
Rishabh, good afternoon. Thank you for getting me to your show. Excellent. I must compliment you, your leadership and the channel for flagging the right issue. Maybe in hindsight, these issues are coming to light. But I think India has taken a right start, and as a leading nation in the world order today, at least for the sake of righteousness, so that the voice of Global South is also heard. This is also one of the facet of the neglected facet of the Global South. Once upon a time, this global order is to be driven by the G7 or the G6. way back in 80s, and G77 didn't have any say by virtue of their status of non-alignment. So take your mind back to that era wherein India's any kind of representation is to be taken very casually in a very, very indifferent manner.
No, no. So in episode 1, sir, I don't know if you saw it. Okay, we were talking about the specific dry run, the trial run that Parmar did in British Columbia. They actually went to a forest. They were being tracked by Canadian officials. This was in Duncan, British Columbia. This is part of this inquiry report. They conducted a test bombing. 2 Canadian intelligence officials were observing this as it happened, and they let them carry on. This was 2 weeks before the bombing actually took place. So they went and they did test bombing. And the Canadians not only were not aware of it, they were following them while they were doing it. Then they had received this warning, which was very specific. It was not ambiguous. It was very specific that it is going to be Air India. There are going to be time delay devices. They're going to attempt to blow up an aircraft. So you need to check the checked-in luggage and the carry-on luggage as well. A very specific warning that the main guys in charge of assessing threats weren't aware of for 30 years. What does that tell us, sir?
Conspiracy. I'm sorry I didn't see this part, Rishabh. Thanks to you for having highlighted. It's total complicity of Canada as a nation state for deliberately planning and also ensuring that a disaster, the worst disaster, aviation disaster took place. I think they need to be held accountable for having been party to the problem. They have been ignored. We have not held them accountable till now in the global order.
Okay. Wing Commander Bakshi, let me read the conclusion of Justice John Major in his inquiry report. This inquiry report was so damning that Prime Minister Stephen Harper had to come and issue a public apology for the bungling that took place over 30 years. And I'm reading the conclusion, it's 3 short paragraphs. The June 1st Telex, given its specificity and the nature of the threat it described, made the situation inherently high risk. The fact that, combined with the fact that it was received by the RCMP during a very high risk period, should have led authorities to take swift and deliberate action. The fact that there was no investigative agency or security related response was a clear deficiency. Because no known attempts were made to follow up on or to corroborate the Telex in the pre or post bombing periods, the original source of information and the nature of the ultimate connection of the information to the Air India bombing remain unknown to this day, 30 years later. Following the bombing, the relevance and importance of the June 1st Telex to the post-bombing investigation should have been self-evident. Self-evident. The failure to follow up on it is difficult to understand. It's clear English. And this is written under the aegis of what is still a British Dominion part of the Commonwealth, comes under King Charles currently, then under Queen Elizabeth. Wing Commander Bakshi, I mean, it's clear English here. This is not a botch up. What was this? What was intelligence operations? Because those intelligence operations are very good at, we are being told, at spying on diplomats and putting India on trial and revealing how India is probably in cahoots with A, B or C. What were they doing during this entire period for 30 years?
Thank you, Rishabh. What you have brought out is absolutely revealing. But let me tell you one thing, Rishabh. Let us not assume that Canadians are such foolish and inefficient, placing sergeants on top of their inquiries and then bungling up. You think there are 2 possibilities. Either it is bungling, or they knew what they are doing, or they were party to it, that they knew that the aircraft will be bombed and they did not want to take action. This is absolutely, as far as I think, it is the second portion is correct. It is not their inefficiency. Sorry. It is basically they knew what is going to happen. They deliberately wanted to keep quiet. They had already made up their mind regarding the Indian diaspora and how they looked at India. They always knew that. And the Khalistani effect was always there. So let us not say that they were so foolish that poor sergeant did not know and inspector did not know. and they were slept over the letter and it discovered later on. No, it is deliberate attempt. They did it. They wanted to do that, and thereafter they wanted to cover it up. Unfortunately, all countries could not play the game with them. That is there. There are some countries which did reveal. A lot of other things came up.
No, but this is
Canada
the
was under
Canadians
fire.
themselves. We don't have to rely on Five Eyes.
No,
this is
we
the
are not-
Canadians
I mean-
themselves saying you bungled it up. It is. I'm repeating the words. This should have been self-evident. The failure to follow up on it is difficult to understand. What is other than we buried it? What is the other answer, sir, Wing Commander Bakshi, other than we buried it?
That is why I'm telling you they knew it, they buried it, and they hoped like hell that nobody comes to know. That is the whole game. And if we can't be so naive. But actually, to tell you the truth, our actions and reactions were very, very, meek and mild.
Okay.
That was also there.
Okay.
So, not like what we are now.
No, for sure. And so there's a context to this. Okay, there's a context to this. Okay. Indira Gandhi, there's a context. Indira Gandhi has just been assassinated. Rajiv Gandhi is supposed to be headed to New York for a UN function. There is a very high global risk assessment, and I'm quoting another part of this report. CSIS investigator Rob Kobzi testified that he would have taken the June 1st Telex seriously, quoting, when viewed in the context of the assassination of Indira Gandhi, and that it would have led CSIS to treat the Duncan blast, which I just referred to, the trial bombing, a lot differently. This is his testimony. This is the investigator. It goes on to say that there is no evidence that anybody at headquarters of the E division of the Air India task force even took steps to access this information in the post-bombing period. Nobody even went back to check. This failure in turn explains why there is no evidence of any follow-up investigation on this telex. For 30 years, no one even checked. General Sudhakar, in a criminal investigation on the death of 329 souls on board, the largest terror attack that has ever happened in the face of the planet to that date, they simply did not do any follow-up investigation. Is this bungling? Is this cover-up? If this has happened in 9/11, for example, there would have been many who would have had to resign office, lose their jobs, and face public censure and scrutiny.
Rishabh, all I can say at this moment is compliments to NewsX, going line by line. You have dug up the document, at least, if not then, at least now the thing is being dug out. Most important thing is that what is standing out in your articulation, Rishabh, is that it is a premeditated act by Canada. It's a pre-planned act. It's a predetermined, they wanted to sabotage, they wanted to bring down the aircraft. Unfortunately, we have not held them accountable and brought up the issue that out of 329, at least more than 75% of the passengers, they were Canadians. Around 24 of them were Britishers. So these things have not been actually come out in the open. I'm glad that you are bringing out the issue. And in the rules-based international order, the Honorable Prime Minister of this country has been often actually referring to, we must give it back to him. When Osama bin Laden or Al-Jahari was neutralized in Afghanistan, we must all be acquainted with the comments which the Prime Minister of Canada gave. He said, for the sake of the larger good, peace, harmony of the world order.
No, sir. I agree with the premise that extrajudicial killings, whether they happen in encounters or random acts of violence or in India or abroad, that's a slippery slope. There's no doubt about it. So the premise is very simple. Either Five Eyes and Canadian intelligence particularly is extremely efficient, credible, know exactly what they're doing, in which case I can't understand what happened in the Kanishka bombings. Okay? I can't understand. Let me read another line. In June 1985, in spite of the steps called for in the June 1st telex, physical checks of registered baggage were not conducted, and in fact, there was no RCMP explosive detection dog available for the June 22nd flight, at the Toronto Pearson Airport. It's at the Toronto Pearson Airport in which they put the explosive into luggage that ended up in flight of the Air India flight 182. The dog wasn't available. The dog perhaps was on a nap or on a day off. They didn't even check the bags. They just boarded the bags. They didn't even check the bags. They just put them in. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.